If you have an interest in horses and love learning more about horses, the horse industry, teaching, or even managing your own horse business, then you're in the right place. We would love you to join us on our mission, which is to improve the lives of horses around the world through the education of riders, handlers, and trainers. So get comfortable, listen in, and enjoy.
This has been another episode sponsored by Online Horse College. If you haven't had a look at the wide variety of equine-specific accredited courses, then go to onlinehorsecollege.com and I'll see you over there. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Peter Huntington again today. For those who've listened to Peter Huntington's chats before, he's a vet who specialises in equine nutrition and conducts ongoing research and investigation into the nutrition of horses. All you have to do is go to horsechats.com, go to, I think it's number 244, but just go to horsechats.com, search for Peter or search for Huntington and you'll find his previous chats. He's chatted before about 10 tips for feeding horses, but now we're going to talk about a little bit more of a specialty area and feeding performance horses. Now, how are you today, Peter?
Yeah, I'm great, Glenys. Thank you.
Good.
Good to be back here again.
Yeah, good to talk to you again too. And I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy your expertise because you really are a specialist in this field. Now, we talked about the 10 tips of basic feeding principles last time, but now we've got 10 tips on feeding performance horses. And I know we talked about the forage and introducing concentrate and everything else. So it's going to be a little bit more specialised now. So we go through these 10 tips. The first one is select energy concentrates based on workload, the value of fat and fibre in the ration. So can you speak about that, please, Peter?
Yes, there's many different breeds of horses that we use for performance and types of workload. And so the amount of extra energy that they need in concentrates will vary according to the breed, according to those factors, and according to individual metabolism. And things like, behaviour or just general energy to do the work have a big influence on not only the amount of concentrate that should be fed, but the type of concentrate and where the energy comes from. So if you've got a horse that doesn't need a lot of extra energy, then they need to be fed something that's a sort of lower energy or a lower intake feed. If you've got a high energy horse like a racehorse or a very hard working horse like a sort of high level eventer, then or polo horse, then they need obviously a higher intake and or a higher energy feed. Now, traditionally, horses were fed concentrates that were based on starch, particularly starch, depending on the amount of molasses used, sugar, so grains like oats or corn or barley. Most of the energy is coming from starches. But in recent times, there's been introductions of fat and fibre as energy sources. So fat we'll get from oil or sunflower seeds in particular, also from commercial supplements, and fibre we're getting either from hay, of course, which is a basic part of the horse's diet, or from chaff, or from things like digestible fibre sources like lupins or beet pulp or soybean hulls. So if the rider has a number of options, a much bigger menu to choose from, and the most appropriate feed for, there's not one feed that's appropriate for every horse. So you've got to vary your choice of feed and the amount you feed according to the horse.
Yep. I think that's important. That tip itself is that it's not one feed that's appropriate for every horse, that we've really got to look at the different horses and what we should feed them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's all horses are individuals. I mean, one of my, keep it simple and feed your horse as an individual are two of the, key points of basic feeding principles that we probably left off. Would have been easy if we could have had 12 basic feeding principles last time, but we left that individual.
If we had have had the 12, what else extra would you have introduced? What would have been the other two?
I would have said, feed your horse as an individual, which I guess is covered, in many of the things we spoke about.
Yes.
And trying to keep it simple. They're two things I think that are important.
All right. You said about the concentrates and making that it is, is different. And you did talk about horses being too fresh if they've got too much concentrate. Can we talk about the tip number 2 now, which is feeding hot horses?
Yeah, so if you've got a horse that's prone to being a bit too strong or willful or has behaviour issues, then there's a couple of areas there that you need to think about. One is how much concentrate you are feeding, particularly relative to the workload. So if you're working your horse only on the weekend but feeding it every day, then maybe that's excessive. And secondly, the types of feed that you're using. So if you use a fat and fibre-based feed, which is a lot of forage and maybe some fat supplements and very limited amounts of starch, then you're going to create the right circumstances for improved behaviour. So moderating the amount that's fed to match the workload and keep the horse in the right body condition, and looking at concentrates that are sort of more fat and fibre based rather than full of sort of starch. So, going away from things that are too grainy. Now, a lot of concentrates these days are pelleted or extruded, so you can't really tell the amount of grain that's in them. But you can make some assessments either from the bag or from the from the company that is supplying them. As well as feeding lower starch concentrates, you could also look at feeding lower intake concentrates. So a lot of horses don't need 2, 3, 4 kilos. They do perfectly well on forage with, say, 1 kg of a balancer pellet that's supplying some minerals and vitamins and things like that, perhaps a bit of extra protein to match up for deficiencies in the hay. So not every horse needs a feed that's fed at 2 to 4 kilos, but if you do have a hot horse, then really look at the choice of feed you're using, head for reduced concentrate intake, even down to, say, 1 kg, but use a feed that's designed for that, or head for things that are higher in fat and fibre and lower in carbohydrates.
Okay. I think that's some good advice for people with hot horses. What about on the other end of the spectrum? This is number 3, is feeding lazy horses.
Yeah, well, here we sort of think about ponies, I suppose, and often warm bloods that are asking sometimes lacking energy. Now, sometimes they're lazy for veterinary reasons, so I think you need to look at, is the horse lazy because it's got sore joints or sore feet, or is having muscle problems like tying up, particularly in a warm blood situation. There's some disorders there. So are there reasons for it being perceived to be lazy when it's not really? Or does it just need a bit of extra energy? And some of these horses will benefit from strategic use of higher starch feeds. So coming from grains like oats, which are a great grain to feed horses. Horses eat them well. They're well digested and safe to feed. So sort of strategic use of increased amounts of oats related to competition or heavier training sessions can give your horse that bit of extra energy. The other thing, of course, there is fitness. So having the horse fit enough for the task you want it to do, but in a feeding sense, then strategic use of extra energy is probably a key thing, and more starch-based energy.
Okay. All right, now we talked about the importance of the adequate forage intake, and I think it was tip number 1 on the 10 tips of the basic feeding principles, but you've got it again because we've got stabled limited pasture, because competition horses and performance horses are often worked every day and in a situation where they're not in that herd situation. They're separated to make it easier, to make it more practical for the person that's working them. So what have you got to say about the adequate forage intake when the horse is stable or there's limited pasture access?
Yeah, the other point is that they go away to a competition and stay there overnight or for a few days and get reduced pasture intake there. You need to replace it, and you need to remember that where you do stabled or limited, the horse has limited pasture access, then giving the horse extra forage, particularly in the form of chaff, in the form of hay. Or you can use chaff or perhaps hay ridges that are around now, will make up for what they're not eating in grass terms. And ideally that would be ad lib forage, so you've got a hay net and the horse has got free choice hay. They can choose how much to eat. There are some horses that will eat too much, so you need to slow that down either by giving them measured amounts or using, double small hole hay nets or double hay nets to reduce the amount of access they get to hay. But they need a certain amount of forage. to replace what they're not getting from the pasture when they're locked up or travelling or at a competition.
Okay. And we've got number 5 is feeding during competition and travel. Is there anything else we need to know besides the forage when we're feeding?
Well, that's a sort of specialist area, and it depends probably on the length of travel.
Yep.
So, where you've got, there's eventers, I think, have travelled to Europe at the moment. There's preparation for Amanda Ross, one of the riders we have to do with. Amanda's just taken her horse to England this week.
Yep.
So she can train and hopefully make the team for WEG. And so what you're doing there is you're recognising that, long-distance competition, you're worried about hydration status, you're worried about having dust-free feed, so you're trying to keep your, perhaps soaking your hay. You're reducing the amount of concentrates being fed because the horse is standing around in a float or a truck or a plane for lengthy periods of time rather than working. You're looking at, where you can, if you travel, depending on the length of travel, get them off, allow them to put their head down and graze, and that allows the dust and bacteria that have got into the respiratory tract to sort of drain outwards with the mucus. In competition, I think one of the key things is trying not to make too many changes. So, feeds that you're going to use at the competition, the horse needs to be used to those at home. And to not feed your concentrates too close to the actual event, the competition event. So you're much better to, and this is for harder working horses, but you're much better to have a gap of 3 or 4 or 5 hours from the last concentrate meal to when you're competing.
Okay.
Than you are thinking, the horse is going to go out and do a round of show jumping. I better sort of load it up with energy just beforehand. Now, there is a bit of a caveat, and that relates to perhaps gastric ulcers prevention.
Yep.
And perhaps looking at giving them some feed, maybe a kg of feed or something like that, a bit of concentrate and some loosened chaff or loosened hay, half an hour or so, perhaps with some antacids in that, a buffer in that, about half an hour or so before they go and work. But you don't want to be feeding them a big feed of grain too close to exercise. Much better letting them just have free choice access to hay and keep the grain and at a distance or at a time gap from the electrolytes, from the exercise.
You said electrolytes. I think you're reading my mind. I was going to ask number 6 was the use of electrolytes. So, if you can talk about that as well.
Yeah, well, it's a good segue there.
Yeah.
Electrolytes are minerals that are lost in sweat, sodium, potassium, chloride, and there are smaller amounts of calcium and magnesium. And these are, the horse sweats to lose heat. It's its main heat loss mechanism. The dog pants. We mostly sweat. Humans mostly sweat. And when they sweat, they lose water and electrolytes. So the performance horse that is sweating, they need to be replaced. And so that's where you've got to look at strategic replacement of electrolytes. Horses don't need electrolytes every day because they do different amounts of work and do different levels of, they have different sort of sweat losses. So look at choosing your electrolyte replacement program based upon how much the horse is working and how much it's sweating, and adjusting it accordingly. There's many commercial electrolyte products, and one of the keys is that every horse needs some salt every day, and salt is sodium and chloride, so it's part of what they're losing in sweat, but they all need some salt every day, and so that's a key part of. But when they go beyond light work and start to sweat significantly, it needs some replacement. Have a look at the electrolyte supplement you think about using, and look for higher amounts of chloride, sodium and potassium, and less fillers, like it's often filled up with sugar or B vitamins or things like that really aren't lost in sweat, so we don't need them. So we've got things like Restore is the name of our product. It's I think a well fortified one. There's a number of others around, and to adjust their use according to how much your horse is sweating.
All right, I think that's a good tip, because I think sometimes electrolytes are just fed regardless, regardless if the horse is lame or not.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, there's no.
Yeah. Wait, can you hear anything? No? That's because we're waiting for someone with a good quality horse product to be advertised here. If that's you, then contact us, horsechats@horsechats.com, and we'll send you the details. Thanks. All right. Now, also too, and you did talk about lazy horses and going back to they might have sore joints or sore feet or something, but you've got here number 7, the inclusion of joint supplements. So would you be able to talk about that as well? That's an interesting one for people, particularly if they've got lazy horses.
Yeah, well, it's a growing area of a growing market for the use of. There are injectable joint supplements that you can get from your vet, or there are some oral ones around. They might be based on glucosamine. Sometimes they have chondroitin in them. There's hyaluronic acid, which is a sort of more potent oral joint supplement. And or there's green lip mussel and a variety of things out there. So there's a lot of products out there that people use, and they might be using them because their horse is showing some signs of joint disease and they want to reduce the damage to the joints, reduce the inflammation, and that's a good thing. Very often they're used for prevention, and that's a bit harder to tell. Is there a benefit in that? And obviously, in an individual horse, you're never going to know because that's just a case of one. But joint supplements have been around. There's increasing numbers of them around. There's lots of glossy advertising, and the choices, how people are choosing. Do you use something? And performance horses, they don't all need to use them. Depends on the work they're doing, how long you want the career to go for, and are they showing any signs of joint disease like sort of swelling or pain or lameness or heat? And then you have a choice of products. So there's many products out there. In the oral sphere, I think, the basic ones are glucosamine. There needs to be a certain amount of glucosamine a day in the supplement. So 10 grams of glucosamine for a 500 kg horse would be the sort of the minimum. There are advantages perhaps with the inclusion of chondroitin or MSM or other ingredients, and hyaluronic acid, I think, is now becoming more widely available. And we have a hyaluronic acid supplement called Synovate HA, which is a really high-quality supplement.
How do you spell that one, Peter?
Synovate, Synovate, Synovate HA, and that's a supplement that is a high-quality hyaluronic acid. It's a liquid, so it's easy to give, and that can improve a number of aspects of joint function.
Okay, good.
And the hyaluronic acid is a natural component in the horse's joint, and it's a key thing is sort of lubrication. It's a key part of the joint fluid and lubricating the sort of cartilage surfaces that are gliding on top of one another, and the joint capsule, and so it's got some anti-inflammatory properties and a number of beneficial properties for cartilage and for joint fluid.
All right. Now, with these supplements, are there any that we have to watch? Just thinking about performance horses and swabbing, is there anything we've got to watch there, or anything that is on the market that we do need to watch?
Definitely. There's a number of things or situations where supplements have been contaminated with drugs that have led to positive swabs. I think there's two areas there. A number of herbal supplements, I think, and particularly if somebody puts on you see a product, this will not swab, this will not test, so that's a red flag. Okay. I'd run a mile from those sort of things because that's not possible to say. It indicates a naivety. But I think looking for supplements from reputable manufacturers that are manufactured in facilities that have good manufacturing protocols, GMP accreditation, good manufacturing practice, or are registered now. Amongst joint supplements, some of them require registration with the APVMA, and that's an indicator of at least that the manufacturing will be done right. But there's many of them around now, and there are some of the more grander claims, and this won't swab, etc. You want to treat them with a degree of caution. It's definitely an area to be aware of, and it is the same with all sorts of things that you add into your horse's feed. But particularly sort of, herbal things, and sometimes they can have drug they have drugs in them.
Okay. All right, now number 8, you've got feeding during spelling, and I've got to put in there, because we do have some overseas listeners, that spelling means holidays or time off.
Yeah, holidays. So you're not working your horse, and horses need a break.
Yep.
They need a break, and often it happens when the rider has a break. The rider goes away from holiday.
Yep.
So, but sometimes it's enforced due to injury. They need a break to allow lameness to resolve. And other times there are other reasons. So obviously when that happens, the workload reduces, so the horse doesn't need as much energy, so you're going to cut down the amount of concentrates that your horse is being fed. They still need, you can't cut them out entirely and just feed forage. Obviously we'll need some sort of supplement that supplies minerals and vitamins, but a lower intake supplement or a lower intake feed, such as a balanced pellet, may be appropriate. And it depends whether you want the horse to gain weight or lose weight. So you've got to adjust the concentrate intake according to those parameters. And if you need the horse to gain weight, then they are going to be fed some concentrates in that period, and they're going to be fed in excess of their maintenance requirements, and so they'll gain some weight. And that's often, in racehorses that happens, but in a performance horse, it shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the situation where you need to be gaining weight. You're trying to keep them at a sort of steady weight throughout the year.
Okay. And then that way, if they've got that steady weight, it's not like they've dropped weight because they've been spelling and they've got to come back in and put on weight and increase the workload at the same time.
Yeah, that's very difficult to do that. So you're better to look at maintain them. So you've got to look, okay, what's the paddock they're in? How much grass is available? If there's not enough grass available, or the quality's not good enough, do I supplement that principally with hay? And often the horse will tell you out in a paddock. He'll tell you where they want to eat the hay, and if the grass is there, they'll take that as their first choice. They won't eat the hay.
Yep.
If they're spelling during winter, they might like the hay because there's a bit of waste heat that comes from the digestion of fibre in the hay, whereas the grass can be quite watery, and so they might eat the hay to keep warm. But they very often they'll tell you about their need for hay by leaving it or consuming it.
Okay. Yes. Okay, now the next one is number 9, understanding how hard your horse is working.
Yeah, that's a difficult one for many people to judge, and you may say, okay, I'm doing dressage, but there can be a massive range in the work the horse does, or show jumping, depending upon the number of jumping efforts and what the sort of training is. Does the training involve a lot of jumping, or does it involve a lot of flat work? Mm-hmm. And so it's difficult to do that. So the one way of doing it that has a bit more science is to look at, measuring, actually making some measurements of the amount of work your horse is doing. And you can do that, a bit like, the odometer and the speedometer of your car. You can do that, but how do you do it? If you look at heart rate, that's an indicator of the amount the horse is working. And so we've collaborated with a sort of software designer to come up with an app called Clock It. And that's actually a free app that you can download, Clock It EQ, and it goes on your phone, and the phone goes with the horse, and that will record, the time that the horse spends walking, trotting, cantering, etc. If you've got heart rate monitors attached to the horse, it'll record heart rate, and that gives you gives us a better guide as to how hard the horse is working, because they might be trotting up a hill, and that's harder work than cantering on the flat. Mm-hmm. So using something like that and making a bit of a record, keeping a record of how long you work for, can give you a bit better clue. And we've done some studies looking at the influence of time and distance of work and energy needs, and there's a good correlation. And you can make some of those correlations from using, say, heart rate data, or just using, time and distance. So the amount of time per week that you spend at different gates will obviously influence it. So it's a free app, Clock It EQ. There are some others that are there. It's a bit like the sort of the wristwatch or that people use when they're running. who are exercising, and they're wanting to record, how far they run and their speed and things like that. So it's the same sort of thing, but it's there for horses.
Yes. I've used it, and I think it gives you a lot of feedback. It gives you feedback, and you can also guess and say, right, what do you think I did today? Could be a bit different to what you actually did.
Yeah, that's right. So it's the time. We're all being encouraged to walk so many steps per day. Well, why not? Let's look at that with our horse. And
yes.
And it's interesting too that if you and this just goes in the phone on a phone, and the phone's on the right goes with the horse. Some horses do a lot more steps in the paddock than others do, who stand by the gate waiting for the feed. So that's part of their exercise program as well.
Yep.
If you're an equestrian coach or a horse riding instructor, or even if you aspire to be one, have a look at the free video series for horse riding instructors on the Horse Chats website. Go there now, have a look, horsechats.com.
All right, now number 10 here is pre-work feeding for gastrointestinal health.
Yeah, I think I've actually spoken about this earlier.
You did talk about minimising gastric ulcers before, yeah.
Yeah, when I spoke in the competition, feeding during competition, but this is for everyday training, and that gastric ulcers are a very common problem in horses, and in part, that relates to there's a number of factors involved that we would call risk factors for gastric ulcers, and that could be a whole topic in itself, but maybe we get to that. We do get to it later on, a bit down the track, but acid, the horse's stomach is naturally fairly acid, particularly when the horse hasn't got any feed in its stomach, and that acidity is the liquid in the stomach is sort of meant to be confined in the lower half, and there is a mucus lining covering the stomach to protect against damage from the acid. However, when the horse walks or trots or canters, you can imagine that liquid splashes around, and so the very acid liquid then splashes into the top part of the stomach, and it doesn't have the same lining, it doesn't have the same coating, and that starts to cause ulceration, erosion and ulceration. So one of the good preventative strategies is to put something into the stomach before the horse works, and to use a couple of components. One is you can just use, say, lucerne, and lucerne has a great buffering effect. So feeding half a biscuit of lucerne hay or a couple of dippers of lucerne chaff, and sometimes people mix that up with a bit of concentrate feed as well, and that's because the horse is more likely to eat it if there's a bit of concentrate feed, and you can also put a sort of buffer in. So there are various buffers. So, there are some feeds that have these buffers in them. There are some feeds that have these buffers in a bit of chaff. So something like Barristock Complete Performance, an example of that, where it's got some chaff, it's got a natural buffer. So that might be a good feed to use in prior to training, or you can mix it up yourself with your normal feed and some lucerne chaff or hay. And that really helps the splash of the acid, helps stop the splash of the acid, and helps buffer the acid. So you're reducing your risk of ulcers.
Yeah, I think that was good, because you've not only explained why and what, but you've also explained why and a little bit about what's going to happen within the horse's gut. So that was good. All right, well, those 10 tips for feeding performance horses. The first one was select the energy concentrates based on the workload, the value of fat, fibre in the ration. Anything to sum up there, Peter?
I think this is a really important part of feeding a performance horse, getting the energy balance right. And, the amount of energy and the sources of energy are probably the key thing to the success or failure of your feeding program. And this is where, it goes back to judging a little bit, weighing your horse, so looking at changes in body weight, or more likely looking at assessments of body condition score, and being flexible about so the way you feed, the amount you feed, and what you feed. And not every performance horse, needs concentrate feed, because some of them with good metabolisms that aren't working too hard might just need 1 kilo of a balancer pellet, and other horses doing the same sort of work might need 3 or 4 kilos of a higher energy feed. So we've got a real range there.
Okay, good. All right, the next one was about feeding hot horses. So what have you got there?
Well, your feeding strategies, we've got hot and lazy horses at two ends of the spectrum. or you've got the normal horse in the middle, and the feeding strategies for those are going to differ in terms of the amount you feed and the choice of where the energy comes from. So feeding fat and fibre-based energy is much less likely to mess with the horse's mind and influence behaviour adversely. And the sort of lazy warm blood often needs a bit of grain to get them going.
Okay, so that was tips 2 and 3. And number 4 was ensuring adequate forage intake when the horse is stabled or limited pasture.
Well, this gets back to the horse's basic need for forage. So if they're out grazing, they can have free choice forage intake, and that might, they might graze for extended periods a day, depending on the amount of concentrate they're fed and the amount of hay they're fed. But then when you take them into a box or in a yard, or they're in an area with limited pasture, then you have to replace that because they don't have the free choice forage.
Okay, good. Number 5 was feeding during competition and travel.
Well, things are different there. Feeding during travel is a specialty item, and that depends on the length of time you're travelling for. If a longer journey, I think having a hay net in front of the horse is a good idea, but that you want to make sure that there's not dusty hay, so keeping the dust down is really important. Thinking about electrolyte replacement, so the horse starts its competition with adequate amounts of electrolytes, and I think I'm jumping ahead to the next point, and not feeding your concentrate feed too close to the actual competitive event. But if you've got multiple events, such as a show jumping, you're away for the weekend, you've got several show jumping classes, you've got to think about things like antioxidants for sort of muscle health, think about replacement of energy stores, etc. So it becomes a specialised area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. All right, you talked a little bit about electrolytes. Was there anything else you wanted to say?
Oh, just that, you don't need to feed electrolytes every day or to every horse. It really depends upon, what sweat losses. Sometimes some feeds have got electrolytes in them, but to pick a product that's got plenty of electrolytes and to use it according to the amount the horse is sweating.
Good. All right, number 7, inclusion of joint supplements.
Yeah, this is a very popular area. It's an area where people spend a lot of money on, and sometimes I think I'd be careful about, using them when appropriate and picking the right quality product to use.
Okay, good.
And not just, it's difficult, the marketing, people making, the glossy brochure and the big claims look attractive, but they're not always the best quality product.
Okay. All right, the next one was feeding when the horse has got some time off.
Time off, they're not working as much. So unless they need to gain weight or sort of rebuild muscle or do something like that, then you're going to reduce the amount of concentrate that you're feeding them, give them the chance to go back to a more natural diet with more forage, and to sort of reduce but not totally eliminate concentrate from the horse's diet, because they do need, particularly if they're out for an extended period of time, they still do need some of the supplements, the minerals like calcium and vitamins, etc., like vitamin A and E that they're getting in their feed.
Yep. All right, number 9, we talked about understanding how hard your horse is working. We talked about the app Clock at EQ. So if you could talk about that quickly, that would be great.
Yeah, well, that's a free app that you can get, which will do the calculations on how much time and the horse spends working at different gaits on a day and week and a month, and give you a guide as to the differences between, and you can go back and compare. And it, as I say, it is a free app, so it's something that many people have used around the world, and a similar function to the sort of Polar or Garmin watches that people have these days and use to monitor their own exercise. So that's something that you can download it, and is a good guide to and a good record-keeping system for how hard your horse is working. Yes.
Okay, and number 10 was the pre-work feeding for gastrointestinal health.
Yeah, I think this is, as we're more aware of gastric ulcers, and everyone is aware and the potential impact of them, this is one of the strategies that you can do. It's not going to totally replace the use of drugs such as omeprazole that reduce acid secretion, but it does give you the chance to reduce the aggravation. And there are some horses that you go, well, they're uncomfortable working. They seem uncomfortable working, and it may be that they've got gastric ulcers and the acid in their stomach is splashing around and irritating them.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be, one of the factors. So putting some feed in there, particularly based on lucerne, the forage should be lucerne, and perhaps a little bit of concentrate feed and maybe a buffer as well is a really good management tool.
Yep, good. All right then, that's wonderful talking to you today. We've been talking to Dr. Peter Huntington, who's the Director of Equine Nutrition at the Kentucky Equine Research, and he's been talking about 10 tips on feeding performance horses. Now, Peter, your contact details, if people would like to contact you, contact Kentucky Equine Research, and also the details for the Clockett EQ link. We'll put them in horsechats.com, but if you could talk about them now, just in case someone's there with their pen and paper or on their phone ready to write down your details.
Okay, well, the website is kr.com, and there's a link to Clockett EQ on the website, or you can just search it. It'll come up. Clockett EQ Sport is the one there. On that same website, you can get to the library that's got links to Equinews, which is a fantastic resource for articles about horse nutrition, about health, about some articles about management, and these are easy to understand articles. And you can also look at phoning us on 1-800-772-198 or emailing advice@kr.com, and hope to give you good balanced advice about your feeding and nutrition queries.
Okay, and there's also a couple of things we talked about with Restore and Synovate and a couple of other things. There'll be that on the website as well if you want to look into purchasing it.
Yeah, that'll be that on the website, and if you're wanting to look at more details about those or feed-wise, so we work with Barrow-stock feeds in Eastern Australia and Milne feeds in Western Australia, and they've got websites with details of products that can help you feed your performance horse better. So it's barrowstockhorse.com.au or milne.com.au. So good products, good feeds, and the other thing we've done with Barrow-stock, or with both of those actually, is we've got some software called MicroSteed that allows. It's a sort of ration design software. So if you put some details of your horse in, the forage it's got, the size it is, and the work it's doing, and then we'll offer you a menu of choices about certain feeds, and it does some calculations about. You can choose. I want a particular feed, such as Barrow-stock Command, or because it's a sweet feed, or I'd like a pelletin feed, like Milne, like Pegasus Cool Max. Choose that, and then the software will do some calculations about the amount that you should feed of that and the amount of forage. So, and that's if you look for MicroSteed, and I think both of their websites have got links to that MicroSteed function.
Good. I think that's a bit of good research if you've got horses, particularly if you're feeding performance horses. So thank you for telling us about that. And those links will also be on horsechats.com/Peter Huntington 3 it'll be, or just go to horsechats.com, search for Peter or search for Huntington, and you'll find that page with all those details. So thank you again, Peter. Thanks for talking to us today, and we're looking forward to our next chat.
Great, Glenys. I look forward to that too.
Bye.
Bye.
Now, if you're still there, you probably know that I'm absolutely passionate about education within the horse industry. That's why I host this podcast. My other venture is Online Horse College. Have a look now at onlinehorsecollege.com, and I'll see you over there.
Remember that our comments and instructions are general in nature and do not take into consideration your individual horses or your individual ability and circumstances. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please leave your comment below.